this video I'm going to explain that how we implement the factory design pattern in our project. So as I explained in the previous video that the need of factory design pattern here. So this payment service IMPL, this REST API calls, Stripe notification control and reconciliation service, these are all required to send a request for updation of payment status. So rather than directly sending the request to the repository layer, it sends the request to this payment status service IMPL class. So we are designing payment status service interface and its implementation class payment status service implementation, and we are going to design one factory class, payment status factory, which returns the object of the required processor depending on the status of the request. And we are gonna create this transaction status processor interface which has one abstract method process status, and then we create these three implementation classes which implements this transaction status processor and override the process status method of the transaction status. So let's first create the transaction status processor. So this is our coding, this is the payment controller. Here, as I explained, here we in the payments processing service we have two API calls, one for create transaction and one for initiate transaction. So as we know, controller is the input point of the Spring Boot application. So here is the post mapping for create transaction, and this is post mapping from initiate transaction. So this is nothing but the create transaction request where we give the required fields, user ID, payment method ID, provider ID, and all these things. And first we create this request and send it as a response, send it as a JSON, and while receiving it in the controller we need the annotation request body to receive the JSON data. After receiving it, it calls the create transaction method of the payment service. Its implementation class is this. So create transaction, and here we are printing this, and same for the initiate transaction. When we give the post request with ID and initiate ID and this endpoint, the ID received here with the annotation path variable, another request. Here we have create, for now we have created the initiate transaction request which is blank for now, we'll code it later. And this initiate accepts this JSON body with the annotation request body. After calling this, it calls the initiate transaction method of the payment service implementation class. Here we are printing the ID and this initiate transaction request. So let's first execute it. Maven build clean Spring Boot And here we are opening the Postman for testing purpose. Okay, our application has been started, server has been started. Okay, let's first check the create transaction. So we need this much data to request the create transaction. Send. Okay, this transaction created for service, and we are getting the required output here in the log. This create transaction called with this request, and this is called from implementation class. So this is successful. Now check for the initiate transaction. Okay, as we have to pass one ID, so I'm passing the 123 as an ID in the URL itself. And initiate it, it requires the JSON body, so I'm sending for now the empty JSON body. Yes, transaction ID is 123 and it is for service implementation there. Yes, both are successful. Now what we have to do, we have to implement this factor design pattern inside the project. So first let's create the transaction status processor. So I am creating this transaction status processor in implementation. Okay, I am creating a separate package for no, I am creating this first the interface inside the interfaces package, and the name is transaction status processor. Okay, finish. See, transaction status processor. As I explained, the transaction status processor is nothing but an interface, so I'm mentioning it as a interface which has one process status method. So for now, making it string return type and process status. For now I am keeping it blank. Okay, process status. Now let's create the implementation classes for this transaction status processor. So I am creating these implementation classes. Inside implementation service.impl dot processor package, I am creating a separate package for processors. So created status processor, and to add the implementation class transaction status processor. Okay, finish. Let's create the same classes for uh, initiated status processor. Okay, and one is for pending status processor. Okay, see, this is created status processor. So this is nothing but a service class, so we are mentioning it with service annotated with service annotation, and the process status we have to implement here the yes process status. Okay, for logging purpose we have to use the annotation slf4j. Here we giving the log that processing created status and returning that process created status. Okay, save it. Okay, now the initiated status processor, again we have to annotate it with service, and for logging it is slf4j initiated status processor. Okay, log information that processing initiated status and process the initiated status. I'm saving this. Then pending status, again annotate it with service, and for logging slf4j. Then log.info processing the pending status and returning processed pending status. Save it. So for now we have created this structure, these three processors and this interface. Now let's create the payment status factory. This payment status factory I'm creating inside the service payment status factory. Okay, this is payment status factory. This is also an service class, service layer. So and for logging I'm giving it slf4j. Okay, we have to create one method here, public. Okay, the method, the return type for this method, as the factory design pattern says, the return type must be the parent class, that is transaction status processor, because it returns the object of the child classes. So here get say get status processor. Here we are receiving the status from invoker. Here what we have to do here first. Okay, okay, I'm logging here that get status processor called with the status, and this is the status. Now using the switch case. Okay, now here case 1, case 2, because we have given the ID case 1, case 2 and case 3. Here is the status, and okay, we are going to use here the dependency lookup concept. So I have to create this application context object context, and for injecting it I have to make it final, and for enabling the constructor injection we have to use the annotation required as constructor.